Hey everyone, today I'm back with another video, and it's gonna be another tier list video. I know I have to get back into the routine of making like actual essays, but I just wanted to make another one just to, get myself a little used to making them since, my last real scripted video was made over a year ago. So I decided to just have another video where I would just talk, and today I decided to talk about the Nolan movies. Christopher Nolan is one of the most creative and culturally relevant directors working today. He has had a major influence on a lot of film fans and filmmakers and just the overall public in general. And he is a very interesting director. He's one where there's a lot to talk about him because he has such a creative, distinct style that you can really there's so much interesting things to be discussed with it. And I think not all of his movies are perfect. I think not all of his movies stick the landing for 100%, but I still do appreciate him a lot as a filmmaker. I think both the people who say he's one of the best filmmakers and the people who say he's not good at all are really, really just over exaggerating it. I think he has great, really, really admirable traits as a filmmaker. However, I also think that he needs a little bit of improvement in order to become actually someone on the level of Kubrick or Scorsese or Hitchcock. But still, I thought it'd be fun, especially since Oppenheimer just came out, to rank all of the Christopher Nolan movies on a tier list. Now, I have not seen every single one of his movies. I have not seen Following, I've not seen Insomnia, and I have not seen Tenet. I probably should check these movies out, but I decided I would still make this video because I've seen a majority of his films and think, Insomnia, Following, and Tenet are definitely the three of his that the least people have a strong opinion on. So, but I will still eventually check them out, and I'll probably, edit this video in the description and add where I think these movies would place on the tier list. So if you guys are interested, then I'll probably add that in. So anyway, let's get started already. Too much rambling. Let's get started with the first movie, which is gonna be Memento. Memento is Christopher Nolan's second movie after Following. It was released in 2000, and Memento is an excellent movie. Memento is definitely one of his movies that I enjoy the most because I think it is just such a creative concept. Basically, the movie is told in reverse chronological order, so everything starts from the movie starts where the story ends and ends where the story starts. And not to mention, the entire story revolves around a man trying to figure out the people who raped and murdered his wife. However, he has short-term memory loss where he forgets everything that happens to him 15 minutes before. So that makes it especially hard for him to figure out what really happened and what really didn't. And this movie is so creative. It is very well written. It has one of Nolan's best scripts. Easily, I also think the movie is just really creatively shot and directed and has some really, really fascinating scenes. I think this movie just really takes Nolan's concept. Like, this movie already from the start introduces Nolan as a filmmaker and how dense his concepts are and how grand they are. Because this movie's concept is really just mind blowing since it's told in both reverse order and the character forgets everything, which is a very hard premise to tackle. And I haven't really seen any movies that did it quite in the way Memento did, and I think it just already shows Nolan's innovation as a filmmaker. So there are a few things about it I don't love. I think this movie, like almost a lot of Nolan movies, really needed a better emotional core. I think Christopher Nolan's one of his issues as a filmmaker is that he's so focused on the technical elements that he kind of forgets to include real emotional core. And this movie really needed one, I feel like, because you do need to care about, the Guy Pearce's character. I don't even remember. Leonard Shelby, yeah, that was his name. You really need to care about him as a character, but the movie kind of does make you care, but it's so focused on telling the story that it doesn't really give you this much of an emotional core, which I think is a little disappointing. Besides that, I think it's one of his best movies. I think it's very, very creative, very exciting, has some really, really interesting writing, and one of the best twists in any Nolan movie easily, so I'm definitely going to give this an A tier. Next up is Batman Begins. Batman Begins was his third movie. It released in 2005, and it was the first movie in the Nolan Batman trilogy. And Batman Begins is a very good movie. I'm going to put Batman Begins in B. I don't really have much to say about Batman Begins. I think it's just a solid origin story movie. It kind of did do a lot for comic book movies because it was the first comic book movie that you could really say was dark. Before then was like Spider-Man and X-Men and Hulk, and those movies were all kind of very comic booky, but Batman Begins felt like a real serious drama, and that changed a lot for superhero movies. I think a lot of people say that The Dark Knight did that, but I think you could say that Batman Begins was the beginning. And this movie, I think the first half is great. I love everything having to do with Ra's al Ghul and how Bruce Wayne becomes Bruce Wayne, and the character development is fantastic. However, I think the second half is not quite as good as the first. I think a lot of it is just kind of cliche superhero action finale. It's not bad by any means, but the action is not that great, and it just does not really, it just does not compare to the first half. The first half is just such a good story, but it feels like the second half doesn't do much outside of just being another, blockbuster third act. It doesn't feel that much different from any other MCU movie. So that's kind of why I don't love it as much as I could have, but I still think it's a very good movie. Next is The Prestige. This is a really, really enjoyable movie. The Prestige is definitely one of my personal favorite Nolan movies. I think this movie is just very entertaining, very exciting, and has one of the most creative Nolan premises. The entire movie is really just about two magicians who battle out and go crazy trying to beat one another. And it is just so fun. It is so exciting. I think Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale both deliver really good performances in this. I think Christian Bale, especially with the character he has to play, is great. I think this movie also just has so many fun, exciting, creative sequences and really, really clever storytelling. I just think the movie is Nolan personified. It feels like Nolan really just puts everything in this movie that is just his style, his editing, his ideas, his storytelling, his twists. Everything in this movie just really, really feels like a Nolan movie, and I think that's great. I think he does a really good job. It's easily Christopher Nolan's best twist. I don't want to reveal it, but it's an amazing, really mind-blowing twist that makes me want to watch the movie again. I've only seen it once, but I want to watch this movie again just to watch it and know what's happening in the end, because there are clearly a lot of clues that Nolan puts in the movie for you to figure out, but you don't, because he kind of, how Chris Stuckman said in his review, he kind of films that as a magician, so he shows you something in plain sight, but distracts you with something else, just like a magician does, and that's what he does in this movie with the twist. I think this movie has flaws for sure. I kind of don't like how seriously it takes itself sometimes. I wish it was more fun, because it's not that deep of a movie. I don't think it pretends it's deep sometimes, and really there's not much complexity with the characters. It's just really obsession, and that's an envy. Pretty much that's it. It's not a very ambiguous movie, and the movie kind of tries to act like this prestigious, serious drama, and that kind of turns me off sometimes. Also, I think this movie is not that well shot. I wish it was had better cinematography. I feel like the movie had potential to look beautiful, but it's not really one of his best looking films. But still, overall, great movie. I'm going to put it in the A tier. Next is The Dark Knight. This is the best Christopher Nolan movie. I'm going to put it in the S tier. Now, do I think The Dark Knight has flaws? Yes. Do I think this movie's overhyped? For sure. I think people who say it's one of the best movies ever made are out of their mind. This is not... this is number 3 on IMDb, and it's below Shawshank Redemption and The Godfather. And I don't think it's even in the same league as either Shawshank or Godfather. It's not a perfect movie, and it's definitely not as important as people say it is, but it is still really, really good. It still changed the way for superhero movies from then on. It still had Heath Ledger as the Joker, one of the best villain performances ever, and totally deserved that Oscar because he was just incredible in that movie. It had some phenomenal action scenes, amazing effects, really, and just in general, the tone, the story, the intensity of this movie is so memorable. Like, you would not expect this from a Batman movie. It is like crime drama disguised as a superhero movie, because the writing is just so interesting, and the movie is genuinely dark and intense and has a lot of really, really, really dark moments and really, really complex ideas that explores, and I think that's great. I think this movie also feels like Nolan just put everything in. It feels like a perfect movie. It does not feel like his most ambitious project. I think it's just his most complete and perfect film. And I don't think we'll ever get another Nolan movie like The Dark Knight. I think he's past that time. I think he just thinks he got perfection in this movie, and he doesn't really need to add on to it. And I think that's fine. I think this just kind of stands out with a lot of Nolan movies as being just a superhero movie, but also his best movie. So that's where I think The Dark Knight is going to go. Next is Inception. Inception, I'm going to be completely honest, is not one of my favorite movies. I think this movie is kind of overrated. Now, do I think the movie looks amazing? Yes. Do I think the movie has incredible effects? Yes. The action is phenomenal. There's just so many creative ideas in there. There's a lot of really cool moments. That whole action scene with the corridor and Joseph Gordon-Levitt and the truck falling down is just mind-blowing. But I wish there was more of a interesting story. And the problem with this movie is that it kind of wants you to be interested in the story. It's not just about the action. You need to care about Cobb and his wife and everything that happens. The problem is you don't, because the movie has so much exposition and so much expository dialogue that you really do not have time to actually connect with the characters. All the characters except Cobb are kind of forgettable. They're played by great actors, but they're not really potential is not used. And Cobb, Leonardo DiCaprio's in the role, and you'd expect some really, really great character because Leo always has really amazing characters. But I feel like his talent is just not utilized properly in this. He just feels like another character, and his story does not feel as compelling as it should. The ending I love, but mainly because of the concept, not because of the emotional payoff. Because I feel like there's just not enough that this movie provided for me personally, to really care. So I wish it was more. I wish it had a better emotional core. I wish it had a better story. But I still respect the movie a lot for what it does as a film. There's a lot of really creative moments and scenes and ideas put in it. But overall, I just don't think it's quite on the Dark Knight level, as some people would say. Next is Dark Knight Rises. So Dark Knight Rises is probably my least favorite Christopher Nolan movie, and I don't think that's an unpopular opinion, to be honest, especially since I haven't seen these three. Don't get me wrong, this is not a bad movie at all, not by a long shot. I still think it's enjoyable. I think Nolan hasn't really made a bad movie. This movie has definitely a lot of amazing elements still. His filmmaking is still really grand and epic. I still think Bane is a cool character. There's a lot of things to appreciate here, but I think this movie just kind of felt rushed and it felt like Nolan did not really want to make it. It felt like Nolan just achieved perfection with The Dark Knight, and now he just had to end the trilogy somehow, and he made this. And it's fine. It's not a bad movie by any means. It's still pretty competently made and enjoyable, but to me there just feels like not really as much of a connection that you have with Batman as you do in Batman Begins, and especially not in The Dark Knight. I think this movie just goes a little too far at certain places with trying to make this huge climactic battle and does not really have that much of the same complexity and depth as The Dark Knight did. I think the entire ending of this movie just does not stick the landing for me personally. I think Robin was a waste of potential. I think a lot of scenes just kind of drag on. It's too long. There's definitely a lot of things I have issues with here, but it's not a bad movie by any means. But overall, I just think it's Nolan's weakest. Next, we have Interstellar. Interstellar is a tough movie. It could have been my favorite Nolan movie because I love the first act of this movie. I think the first act of this movie is perfect. I think Matthew McConaughey is great. I think this movie is also has Nolan's easily best cinematography. The cinematography in this movie is gorgeous. The effects are mind-blowing. This is some of the best special effects I think I've ever seen in any movie ever. It is so polished. It is so grand. The music by Hans Zimmer is phenomenal. The editing is great. I really love the technical aspects of this movie, and I love the first act of this movie, and I love a lot of the scenes in this movie, especially the scene where Cooper watches his kids grow up on the TV. I think that's just such a beautiful scene. The problem with this movie for me is the third act. I just do not give a shit about the third act in this movie. To me, it just feels completely out of nowhere from everything that we really cared about in the first act. This movie, to me, should have been more personal. It should have had more of this movie about just Cooper and his family, as well as involved in space travel, but they kind of do that, but they try to make it like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where there's just this weird, ambiguous ending that makes no sense and just is crazy and mind-blowing and some twist. It's just not the same thing, because Christopher Nolan is not Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick is the only person who could have made 2001, and I get that you wanted to replicate it, and I totally understand, because yeah, that's one of the best movies ever made. You want to try to get that same 2001 touch, because when you're making a space movie, you're gonna have to be compared to 2001. But I think Nolan should have done his own thing in this movie and not try to replicate that ending, which is why the movie does not land quite as hard as it could have been. But I still love it. I still think there's a lot of great aspects to it, and I would still gladly rewatch this movie. I just don't love it as much as I could have. Now, next is Dunkirk. Now, unpopular opinion here, but Dunkirk might be my personal favorite Christopher Nolan movie. Now, I think The Dark Knight is probably better as a film. You know what? fuck it. Dunkirk is the best Christopher Nolan movie. I said it. I know that this is not an opinion everyone will agree with because yeah, Dunkirk is not. It's a lot of people have problems with this movie because it doesn't have an emotional core, just like how I said in Memento and Inception and parts of Interstellar. This movie doesn't really have an emotional core. But, and that's the reason why it works in Dunkirk is because the movie is purposefully meant for you not to give a shit about the characters. Because in Memento, it's about Leonard Shelby trying to figure out the mystery. You should care about Leonard Shelby because it's all about him. Inception, there's a whole character arc with Dom Cobb, so you need to care about Dom Cobb. In Interstellar, there's a whole character arc with Cooper. You need to care about Cooper. In Dunkirk, it's not about the characters. I don't even remember the character's name, and it's not important. Dunkirk's entire idea is to show you the event. The event is what matters, and the event gives an emotional response. Even though you don't give a shit about any of the characters, I get it. I think that's the point, because the characters are so dehumanized that it kind of shows you how in war there's not really much of an emotional thing to hold on to. It's just about this war. And it is such a well-made movie. I think this is easily one of Nolan's best shot movies. I think this is easily his best edited movie. The editing in this movie is marvelous. I think the score by Hans Zimmer is very intense. And I think the overall movie is just such an exciting experience. It's not too long. It's not too short. I think it's perfect in length. I think it has just phenomenal action scenes. I think there's a lot of subtlety in this movie that I think Nolan doesn't really have. I think Nolan is not a very subtle director, but there's certain scenes in Dunkirk that I feel like have a lot to say, but they don't say it fully. Like everything with Cillian Murphy's character, I think is really heartbreaking, but the movie doesn't make a huge deal out of it. It more so makes you try to understand his character better. And I don't know, I just love it a lot. I could watch this. It's easily the Nolan movie I would most want to rewatch because I think it's just a really, really transcendental movie. I wish I got to see it in theaters because that would have been awesome. So yeah, that's Dunkirk for me. And the final movie on his list, Oppenheimer, just came out, and it's great. Oppenheimer is a really good movie. Do I like it more or less than Memento? That's the question. I think I like Memento a little more. Oppenheimer, though, no. Oof. I'll have to think about this, but Oppenheimer is definitely a great new step in direction for Nolan. Step in the right direction for Christopher Nolan because this movie is very different from anything he's done before. This is his first historical fiction movie fully, besides Dunkirk, because that's kind of a war movie. This is his first movie to really, really be about a historical character. And I think this is his first very, very heavily character-focused movie, besides Batman Begins, which I think doesn't really count. Because this movie is all about Oppenheimer. It's even called Oppenheimer. And Oppenheimer's great. Oppenheimer is a really, really great character. Cillian Murphy's performance is amazing. I think it might be probably Nolan, the best performance in any Nolan movie besides Heath Ledger as the Joker. He is just so enjoyable and interesting in this movie. There's just something about him that is so fascinating, and you want to keep on watching. But besides that, the movie is also incredibly well shot. I love what Nolan does with the cinematography, with the black and white and the color. I think that makes the movie so much more engaging. I think the bomb scene is mind-blowing. I think there's so many epic, grand scenes. The music is freaking awesome. It's a really, really well-made movie, and on a technical scale, it just explodes. But I think there are still a couple things it could have done a little better. I think Nolan kind of tackling such a big project is not going to end up going perfectly from the start. He definitely needs things to work on. I think the pacing a little bit and maybe with some of the payoffs, but still, I love where Nolan's going with these last two movies. It feels like he is not as focused on making these creative twist-centric movies, which are great, but he's more focused on the actual cinematic elements in telling these grand stories instead of trying to, have these creative twists and all that shit like he does in some of these other movies, which are great, don't get me wrong, but it feels like he's honestly maybe better at doing these movies, or at least I prefer how he tackled Dunkirk and Oppenheimer. So yeah, I think I'll put it above Memento, to be honest. I think Oppenheimer was just a really great movie. And yeah, that's the end of the video. These are all in order for me from how much I like them. I think this is the proper way. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys later.